Welcome to the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show, a broadcast service of globalbusinessnews.net.
This episode from the meeting room of Global TV Talk Show is brought to you by
The Bridge School, the accredited international online private school of choice, at bridgek12.org.
Porch Light Rental and Destination Services. Reduce your renter lump sum or managed relocation costs. Visit them at porchlightrental.com.
And by airs.com. With our full range of services, we can help design and manage your international relocation. Find us at airs.com.
Primestone Partners, featuring corporate, government, and developer housing solutions, as well as senior-level advisory services. Find them at primestonepartners.com.
And by International Auto Source. We are the vehicle experts for expats, featuring all major brands of automobiles with flexible solutions and financing. On the web at intlauto.com.
Become a global player in your field.
Cross Culture to Go provides virtual support for your global business and career success.
We can help you thrive in 140 plus countries and markets.
On the web at crossculturetogo.com.
Hi, this is Ed Cohen in San Diego, downtown. Welcome to Global TV Talk Show, a business unit of globalbusinessnews.net, which has been around since '03. Google Analytics has measured our audience page view count, and they say, if we can believe all that, 1.2 million reader page views. More recently, since June 1 through last week, and today is August 24, I think. What day is today? Yes, I think so. And we've had about 16,000 audience page views, various programs. This is the third in a series of what we're now calling Global Medical Talk Show, Global Medical TV Talk Show. And welcome Dr. Ilhem Messaoudi, professor of immunology at the University of California. And welcome, doctor.
Hi, Ed. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to have this opportunity because what we have to talk about is so timely with the variant and whatever other mutations happen to be going on that they're not talking about publicly, apparently. And so, Doctor, I see in the notes here, and I have a couple of notes, that the research in your laboratory to date has been, I'm going to read this, the impact of age on immune response to viral infections. And number two, modulation of immune function by nutritional intake and sex steroid levels. We'll get into that. And number three, uncovering mechanisms of pathogenesis during infection with the emerging and the re-emerging infectious agents. So I read that, and I'm in PR. I'm not anything connected with medicine other than during the Vietnam War days, I was an Army medic. But that reads just like what's going on listening to Dr. Fauci and these other doctors about, but in scientific language. So I'm really honored once again to have you on the program and talk to our business audience, which is 70% US, 20% Europe, about 9% Asia Pacific, 1% Middle East Africa, which is primarily Israel, Cairo, and large Dubai, large in Dubai. India is pretty strong, coming on strong. So it's all business, senior management, some executive level, and we'll be building up the medical aspects of our audience as we focus more. So I've had personally 2 Moderna, and because I'm old, but in good health, thankfully, raised my hand and says I'm ready for the booster any day. So, but I and Joanne took the 2 shots last February, and we had 0 impact at all. but I know some others have been impacted for whatever the reason. But we feel like liberated. We just had, because we just came back from Cabo for a brief holiday, we had to take the COVID again, and thankfully we passed it. It's okay. But the variant is out there, and the variant's been in the news for 6 months, but now all of a sudden here, it's not all of a sudden, but it seems like it's all of a sudden, it's like the monster. Tell us from your view, what's going on?
Yeah, so we had a really tough year last year when SARS-CoV-2 entered the general population. This is a new virus to which most of us are what we could say immunologically naive, which means we've never encountered this virus before. Our immune system has no recollection of this type of viruses, and therefore it basically swept through the population like a wildfire would in a dry bush. And I'm using the California metaphors because that's where we live in Southern California.
So let me ask you, if I may just jump in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to be rude.
No.
So it's in the air, and I mean, it's circulating in the atmosphere.
No. It's circulating in us.
Ah.
So it's circulating in us.
Yeah, but how did it get into us?
Well,
it's through the air, right?
Well, probably not quite through the air, but probably through the theory that I have not yet read any credible evidence to disprove it is that this is what we call a spillover event. So these coronaviruses are endemic in bats. And at some point, there was a spillover event where one of the bat coronaviruses got into the human population. And that could be through interacting with carcasses, hunting bats, being in the same room. There's a lot of opportunities for these spillover events to occur. We see this all the time with other emerging viruses like Ebola, right? I mean, we've heard there's been 13 outbreaks in the Democratic Republic of Congo of Ebola just since the original outbreak in 1996. And most of them have actually happened in the last few years. So these spillover events are actually happening more and more because of urbanization and climate change. And so animal habitat is changing. Humans are encroaching on animal habitats, and animals are having to move because of changes in their environment. And so these spillover events, a virus gets into a host, and for whatever reason, this happens all the time, but for whatever reason, once in a while, the spillover takes hold. The virus was able to replicate in the first contact enough to be passed to another human, another to be passed to the next human. And it's a respiratory pathogen. They're passed from one human to another by respiratory droplets. So being in the same proximity, talking to one another, people may not think about this, but we're constantly spitting at each other, these microparticles. And as this virus has been transmitted from one human to the next, it's adapting to its new host because we are a new host. And so it's, we've had multiple surges. I really thought that maybe we've turned the corner when the vaccines were, gained emergency use authorization, and you actually could see this play out last winter. We had a massive surge December to January, and that surge, fell. You could see the numbers just precipitously falling down as the vaccines were ramping up. I mean, it was really important. And I describe this to people as when people are vaccinated, they act like natural barriers for virus transmission, right? So if I'm fully vaccinated and I have a great immune response, and let's say I get exposed, my immune system will fight the virus. And therefore, I'm not going to be a good transmission point to the next person. So I act as a break, like a fire line break. The problem is when we have a large percentage of the population that still remains unvaccinated. So we plateaued very quickly because, of course, all of us who wanted to get vaccinated as soon as we were allowed to ran out there and got the first appointment we could. Some of us drove 3 hours. I have friends who literally were in the car and drove across the state lines or whatever to get vaccinated. We're very highly motivated to get vaccinated because we wanted this pandemic to end. We wanted to get immunity. We wanted to protect ourselves and our families and our neighbors and our loved ones. And so we ran out the door and got vaccinated as soon as we can. But we plateaued because only about 60% of us were really that excited about getting vaccinated. And that's of the adult population. Of course, we have a large population of children who, at this point, the vaccine is only authorized for use in children 12 years and older. And so we have a very large number of children under the age of 12 who cannot get vaccinated.
So is this, why are the children the last to get this? Because of their just innate strength?
No, it's mostly because the immune system of a small child is not the immune system of an adult, and the regulatory process and the safety precautions that have to be taken just require more specific testing in that population. As I always tell people, children are not small adults. They have their immune system is maturing, and it's just like their bone system and their neuro system, it's all developing. So we just need to make sure that the right dose, the right regimen is in place for their vaccines. And so it just needed more time. It's easy to do a big trial in adult population. We can consent, children can't consent, their parents have to consent. People understand more about the adult immune system than they do about a child immune system. So it's just easier to approve vaccines for adults over the age of 18. And then we work backwards and get the right doses and the right formulations and the right regimen for children that are very young of age.
So the variant is a mutation from the original.
Yes,
right?
And this virus,
I mean, and that happens all the time. Right?
This is happening all the time. This virus is evolving, and that's not necessarily good or bad. So I'm trying to say this in the most neutral way. The virus is getting used to this new host called humans, and it's evolving. And RNA viruses can evolve very, very quickly because RNA molecules RNA viruses have very small genomes. So they're short. They have RNA polymerase, are usually error prone. So DNA polymerases, like the polymerases that copy human genomes when our cells divide, they're very, 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 very methodical and careful and slow and bulky. RNA polymerases are quick, fast, and make a lot of mistakes. And so RNA viruses always exist in what we call a quasi-species. So it's never, if you took a whole bunch of SARS-CoV-2, if you took a secretion from somebody who was sick right now and sequenced it, you would find multiple slight variations even within one single person. So they always exist in this quasi-species space. And then they test out these mutations and see, well, which ones, are better for the virus, right? Which ones make it more transmissible? And if I, can dare give a virus a life form, which it isn't, but it's not in the best interest of a virus to actually become more virulent and more deadly. The best thing for a virus is to infect the host just enough that it can spread it to the next host, but not die, because if the host dies too fast, then that kind of kills off the viral transmission. So viral evolution is not always making something more dangerous. In the case of this Delta variant, it sounds, and it looks from the data that, and it's really hard to really tease that apart, but it seems that it's more transmissible. So it's now better at using the ACE2 receptor to get into cells. It's using the human proteins to get into cells faster, and it's replicating to slightly higher levels. But also this is happening on the backdrop. This variant has emerged on the backdrop of no restrictions whatsoever, right? So this variant emerged at a time where there's really no physical distancing to speak of anymore. Everything is open, people are out and about. There was a period where, we were completely maskless, and, and people who are unvaccinated took this to mean that they could also be maskless. And so it's really, from an epidemiological standpoint, yes, we're getting another massive surge again, but it's happening not only with a new variant, but also on the heels of no physical distancing, none of the non-pharmaceutical interventions that we had in place a year ago, right? So there's two things happening at the same time. The virus is changing. We humans, our behavior has also changed because people have gotten really fed up with being locked up in their houses.
Yeah,
and completely is understandable. I think where my disappointment is as an immunologist is that if we got our vaccination rates up in the upper 80s and 90s, we could all go about this and start going out, and we would have stemmed the ability of this virus to mutate, because viruses mutate when they can be transmitted from one person to the next. That's how the mutation rate accelerates. So if we had a lot more break lines, then we wouldn't get all these variants, right? So we could actually do something about this collectively as society.
Well, thank you very much. So the variant apparently started in Europe, or was discovered there.
Was discovered.
And then somehow it got here.
Yeah, I mean, so we don't, variants, I always tell people don't, I was always very opposed to things like the South African variant or the UK variant. The virus doesn't know if it's in Asia or Africa or North America. It doesn't know that. It's doing the same thing. It's just humans are humans, right? It's gonna evolve no matter where it is. It's just sort of like where sequencing is happening at enough of a regularity that we're able to pull out these variants. And so it could have hopped on a plane, right? Some people are asymptomatic carriers, right? So somebody could have hopped on the plane, had no symptoms, all these temperature checks. People have asymptomatic infections and they have asymptomatic infection. You can't tell. So you get on the plane, they're fine on the plane. They get here and they meet up with their family members, and we can start a new transition. So that's one way, right? It definitely, there's transport, but also, like I said, the virus doesn't know, oh, you can only mutate this way when you're in Europe. When you're in America, you have to mutate a different way. No, it's mutating all the time in all the continents, simultaneously. So it's just possible that this variant just is evolving simultaneously in multiple places at once. There's no geographic restriction on how this virus mutates, because it's just trying to get into human cells better, replicate better, and move on to the next person better.
So what happened with the flu this past year?
Yeah, so we had great, we hardly saw any flu. And guess what? What did we do last fall and winter? We hunkered in our houses, wore masks all the time, and didn't go to Thanksgiving. Oh, at least that, some of us. We didn't have Thanksgiving, we didn't have Christmas, we didn't have any of these events, right? So people were mostly isolated. There were no large gatherings, no malls full of people shopping, right? And so influenza never really got a chance to move around. And our vaccination rates for influenza went up last year, because people felt like if we get, the healthcare system told us over and over again, if you get flu and you get COVID, you could be in really deep trouble, because a double hit to the pulmonary system could be really, really fatal. So people went out and got vaccinated more than they normally do. So it was a combination of two things. We limited the crowds, more people got vaccinated. And the big difference between influenza and SARS-CoV-2 is that we've been vaccinating against influenza for decades now. Right. Whereas, immunity to SARS-CoV-2 is very limited. Even, it's not, I think back in December, a lot of the studies showed that about only 20% of the people had natural immunity, so had COVID. So we're still, whereas if you actually looked for antibodies against influenza, you'd be at 80 to 90% of us would have some form of antibody against influenza. So those natural fire breaks that I was talking about are in place for influenza, whereas there's none of that for SARS-CoV-2, because we're largely naive.
So the fall's coming here in Southern California. We're going to have the same weather for 2 more months, endless summer, but everywhere else in the Midwest and the Northeast, cooler air is around the corner. But are you recommending that I go out and get a flu shot, even though I'm going to be getting that booster?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, one and the other have there's no connection between one or the other. So the Moderna shot is not going to protect you from influenza, and the influenza shot is not going to protect you from COVID. And so, we have to get vaccinated for all the things that we can get vaccinated against, because that's the best way to protect.
What about if I get a shingles shot?
Yeah, you should get that too. You should absolutely get that if you haven't gotten that yet, Ed. You're in that high-risk group. And you can get them all together at the same time, on the same day, because your immune system knows what to do with each one of those vaccines.
That's really brilliant.
And that's, we do this all the time to our kids, right? Yet people are like, I have a 4-year-old and almost a 2-year-old, and, during their pediatric visits, they get, MMR, Tdap, exactly. They are getting 3 or 4 different shots at once. And their immune system knows exactly what to do, and they'll generate simultaneous immune responses to all the antigens that they're exposed to. So
that's pretty amazing. I mean, science is just amazing. I mean, that's God's work. I mean, who did all this? Yes.
Yeah, the immune system is a remarkable organ system. I mean, I'm sure every scientist you talk to will tell you the organ system they study is the most remarkable thing. But I would say that the immune system is pretty amazing.
So I've had green beans. I love green beans. So I have them a lot. I like them better than asparagus, for instance. So, but so the green beans, I mean, it's full of vitamins. So I should keep having, right?
Yeah, we should have a nice balanced diet. It's very important.
Yeah.
But it's okay. You can sneak in the occasional asparagus or Brussels sprouts for diversity.
Okay.
But every one of those, vegetables and brings and yet another set of vitamins and nutrients to the body. So I always say the more colorful your plate is, the better off everybody's going to be, right?
So let's talk about the impact of aging on the immune system, and keeping in mind what we've already just talked about, of course. But so people get older, and a lot of people who are my age or younger, let's just say they're not as healthy as I think I am right now. Okay, for whatever the reason. I think a lot of that has to do. I'm not a doctor at all, but with the immune system, like taking care of themselves, or is it just genetic and something's going wrong?
Well, there's a little bit of both. It's never one or the other. So genetics do matter to some extent, but also what you do matters a lot. So, how much you sleep, what you're eating, how much you're drinking, all that matters. I mean, even under the best of circumstances, if you're taking great care of yourself and exercising regularly, eating a very balanced diet, getting your 7 hours of sleep a night, not consuming more alcohol than you should, all the right things, you're checking all the boxes. You're still, the immune system and all organ systems are still getting older. And, that's illustrated by, let's just talk, since we're on the COVID topic, right? So I think it's estimated that about 15% of COVID cases occurred in people over the age of 65, yet 80% of deaths occurred in people over age 65. Every year, most overwhelming majority of hospitalizations are in individuals over the age of 65. So our immune system doesn't work as well as it used to when we get older. And that impacts not only the ability to respond to an infection, but also the ability to respond to a vaccine. So I don't know if you've noticed, but your flu shot is double the flu shot that I get.
No, that my doc said that the past 2 years. Well, I didn't get it this past year, but the year before I got it, and it was a booster. It was powerful.
Yes, yeah. It's twice the shot. So we're trying to make vaccines work better for older people. Again, it's that, how for children, the immune system of a child is not the same as that of an adult. Well, our immune system over the age of 65 is also not the same as that of an 18-year-old.
So what about male, female?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of gender difference. If you look at, in general, if you look at epidemiological studies, for example, women are more prone to autoimmune disease. So it's generally thought, and there's lots of data that supports that women generate sort of like a more robust and sometimes even a little bit over the top immune response. And that's why they're more prone to autoimmune disease. Post-menopause, it kind of all comes down to be the same. So there is an entire field that kind of studies how ovarian steroids are potentially interacting and modulating how the immune system works. And my lab has actually done some work where we've compared flu responses in women who are taking estrogen replacement therapy versus women who are not. And the immune response in those who are on hormone replacement therapy, specifically estradiol replacement therapy is what we focused on, generate a slightly better immune response than women who are not. We also studied this in non-human primates. So monkeys they have a close genetic homology to humans, very similar physiological systems, including the reproductive system. And we can show that in monkeys who've had their ovaries removed, they don't generate as good of an immune response as monkeys who are currently cycling. So there's definitely a gender dimorphism in the immune response. We don't fully understand why or how, but it definitely exists. And at some point when flu shots, I remember there was one year where the flu vaccine production was impacted by, there was a problem in the supply chain for eggs, because I don't know if you know, but the flu shot is made in eggs. And you actually, it has to be this massive coordination effort where all of these eggs have to be fresh and available on a certain time so they can grow the vaccine in them. And there was a problem. And there were theories, went around where maybe we can give women half the shot because they generate twice or three times the immune response as young men. So maybe we can give them half the shot, and therefore we would have more vaccine doses to go around. So clearly sex matters, but we don't know why, or is it universal for all antigens, or is it just specific for some of these pathogens and vaccines?
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a timely announcement.
Hi, I'm Sergei Gorbatov.
I'm Angela Lane.
Together we are researchers, writers and practitioners in the field of human resources.
And we've also been multi-country, multi-assignment career expats.
We owe our professional development and growth to a very large extent to the international assignment opportunities that we have had.
But in a world where distributed work may become the norm, we also want to understand what happened to the nature, duration, and purpose of international assignments.
Together with our colleague, Julian Dalzell from the University of South Carolina, we're undertaking a study on the future of expatriation.
And we'd value your contribution. You can participate in this important study by completing a simple 10-minute questionnaire.
Access the questionnaire by typing in your browser tinyurl.com/expert study. That's tinyurl.com/expert study. You can also find the link here on Ed's website next to this video.
Thank you for joining us in this study. In return for your contribution, we'll provide you with a copy of our research.
And of course, you'll be invited to an exclusive webinar hosted by Ed, where we will share our findings right here on Global Business News.
And so please go to tinyurl.com/expat study. Take the survey so that we can better understand the future of expatriation.
Something that's really neat is that the Bridge School partners with various organizations to provide learning for their students. For example, we partner with a major ballet company, and we are able to enroll several of their students into our school. So now not only is the student able to participate in a school and have a seamless transition while they're very active in their ballet career, but now they have other dancers that are with them that are doing some of the same courses. So it's almost becoming a camaraderie where they're taking similar courses, they're working together on their ballet, and really being able to form this great partnership with these organizations to provide a needed service. A lot of times there are student athletes who will spend hours and hours at the gym or at the basketball courts, wherever it is. And if they're attending a traditional school, they're in school from 8 to 3. They get a quick snack, and then they're at the gym for 3 to 4 hours in the evening. Coming to us and having that partnership, they're able to break that up throughout the day. They can have a morning practice, get some schooling in, have an afternoon practice, finish their schooling in the evening. So there's that flexibility. And additionally, if there are tournaments or performances, it's fantastic because if there's a week where they have shows straight through, they can take that week off of learning and then pick back up when they're done. So it offers this great flexibility. And for the program owners of these sports leagues, it is a win-win situation for them because they see this need. They see this need that their students need to make sure that they are obtaining the grades necessary to be successful adults in our country and in other countries. But it provides them an environment where they can be successful at both.
Oh, a couple of questions. Women, older women, calcium is a problem, right? In the bones,
Yeah, men
brittleness.
too. Don't forget osteoporosis impacts both men and women, but yes, a little more severe for women, but it definitely impacts both.
So an earlier broadcast we had with Dr. Howard Fedorov, who Mark introduced me to, it was really fascinating. And he spent a lot of time talking to me and the audience about how the vaccine works, how it gets into the system, and it's designed, scientifically designed to do certain things and not other things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can spend a little bit of time about the vaccines, the Moderna and Pfizer, like the mRNA vaccines, and then we can talk about vaccines in general. But the idea of a vaccine is to basically train the immune system to recognize the real bad guy laid down the road while not impacting us in the way that a real virus or bacteria would. And so in the case of the mRNA vaccine, so they basically took the part of the virus that just encodes the spike protein. So the spike protein is what allows the virus to get into the human cells. And so it's just a short mRNA piece that just encodes that part of the virus. And it's encapsulated in a nice little lipid droplet and then has some adjuvants in it. That's because it's good. The immune system likes to know that, oh, I really need to generate an immune response to something. And the way that it knows that is through these interactions with adjuvants. So a bacteria is naturally adjuvanted because it has all these sugars on it and things like that that make the immune system recognize, oh, I need to do something about this. But a piece of mRNA is inert, really. So we package it with lipids and we give it some adjuvants. It gets into the cell. The lipid allows it to get into the cell. The adjuvants provide that extra oomph. The mRNA turns into protein. So our own cells will go from mRNA to protein, which is what they're used to doing with our own genetic material. But they'll turn that into a protein. And that protein is then broken down inside the cell and then presented up outside the cell to T cells. T cells see it. And then they say, oh, this is not self. This part of this protein is not me. I do not have, in our body, there is nothing that looks like this little piece of spike protein. I need to respond to this. So T cells get activated and they start responding. And part of what the T cells do then is help the B cells respond. So the T cells get activated, the T cell response not only is now going to help the immune system recognize infected cells, but the T cells also make all these goodies called cytokines that help the B cells turn into good antibody producing cells. The B cells will now make antibodies against the spike protein too. So you get this nice targeted immune response, right? There's no distractions. You're making an immune response just against spike. And that's why the antibodies against spike that are made after vaccination are actually better than the antibodies you make if you actually got a natural infection. There's lots of studies that have demonstrated this, including work from my lab. The antibodies made by the vaccine are better than the antibodies made by natural infection. And that's because they're not distracted by responding to other antigens that don't matter in terms of the virus being able to enter the cells. Basically, you took all of your energy, all the immune system energy, and you said, focus on this one thing. I need you to make antibodies against spike. That way, when I get infected, the virus can't get into the cells to start replicating because we're making a very focused immune response.
Amazing. Wow.
So that's kind of like in a very simplified way. This is how it works.
So when some people have a bad reaction, it's because of the system that you just described is it's got its own problems that day.
Well, it's not problems in the sense that, so those adjuvants that I talked about, right? They kind of tickle the immune system and get it excited. And sometimes there's just a little much. I got the Moderna arm, so I had a massive welt on my site of infection, and I had a temperature. I was very lethargic, and
wow.
It lasted for 24 hours and then it was over. But the arm lasted a few more days, but it didn't bother me. It was just very interesting. But I've also had reactions to the influenza vaccine and other things. I think my immune system just gets a little hyperactivated sometimes. But to me, that was better than, being in a hospital bed, potentially intubated and on a ventilator, and having to, see my family via FaceTime on a phone because nobody can get in the hospital, being surrounded by people in spacesuits. My husband is a pulmonologist, critical care physicians, and it's been really hard on him. I mean, it's just awful. He's, he really thought like we turned the corner. He actually started seeing other patients in his ICU that, cancer patients, people with car accidents, things like that. And then all of a sudden the ICUs are getting full again with just COVID patients. Preventable disease. Everyone in my husband's ICU, everyone he's seen in the last few weeks during the surge has not been vaccinated. There's no one vaccinated in the ICU. So it's even if the vaccine is not 100% efficacious, it's at 100% efficacious from getting you into a hospital and being in the ICU. And that's really what matters, because when the ICUs are full and every bed is occupied by a COVID patient, then good luck to those who's going to have a stroke. Good luck of those who are going to end up in a car accident. Good luck if you have terminal cancer and you need some comfort care. We have no beds for those people. And I think it's not fair to have the rest of the population pay the price for people refusing to get vaccinated.
Oh, doctor, this is fascinating. Wow. I want to look at these notes one more time before we run out of time. Okay, so the emerging re-emerging this mutations. There's nothing we could do to stop that. That's a natural thing for a virus, right?
Yeah, we can't stop the virus from mutating, but we can stop giving the virus opportunities to mutate. So that is how we can impact that, right? So if more people get vaccinated, the virus doesn't have good hosts in which it can replicate enough to start accumulating mutations, right? So if a virus infects me, if I come into contact with somebody who's infected and I get exposed to SARS-CoV-2, virus won't be able to replicate very long in my body because my antibodies and my T cells are going to whack it. If I'm not vaccinated, and the virus will replicate and replicate and replicate and replicate until my immune system gets a chance to respond to it. And by then it's had multiple days to accumulate new mutations. And, if I'm pre-symptomatic and I'm out there, then I'm infecting other people who may not be vaccinated, and that's given virus more opportunities to mutate. So yes, we can't stop viruses from mutating, but we can sure as hell not give them the opportunity to do that.
So one of your other items here, I'm going to read it again, modulation of the immune function by nutritional intake, which was what we just talked about. And then you mentioned sex steroid levels. Mm-hmm. So what, I have to ask, sex. So sexual activity or just the ability to have or what?
No, not even to that. So I don't, so we were really interested in this whole question of, because of this dimorphism in the immune response that you very, you brought up, we wanted to know how important are androgens and estrogens in terms of modulating the immune system. So is the reason that men and women may have differences in how they respond to infection and vaccine due to the fact that we do have very different levels of these steroids. So are androgens stimulatory for the immune system? Are they more calming the immune system? Or estrogen, on the other hand, is more of a stimulant for the immune system? And how does that come into consideration? So, because the reason why I was interested in that is because as we get older, both men and women have a drop in their respective sex steroids, right? So in women, as we enter menopause, we lose our levels of estrogens and progesterones go way down, or cease after menopause. And then for men, levels of androgens are slowly declining over time. So even if there's no clinical diagnosis, but there is andropause is a thing. And so I wanted to know how that potentially is impacting the immune system. So is just the fact that we're getting older that's impacting the immune system, or is it that we're getting older and then we're losing these important hormones as well? And so it turns out that all these hormones are actually important for functioning immune system. So we did this in non-human primates, again in monkeys, and we compared responses in monkeys with very high levels of androgens. So we took young monkeys, naturally high levels of androgens, and we had older male monkeys with and without testosterone supplementation. And I have to insist on saying that It's very, this was a very well-controlled study. The androgens were delivered at a very specific time of the day because they are on a circadian rhythm, so you can't just take anything over the counter and have it be the same way. So this was done in a highly controlled manner with reagents and things that are not available over the counter. When we were able to restore the cyclicity of these hormones in older macaques, they responded better to a vaccine than older macaques that didn't have it. So it's one little chip that helps us understand what the impact of aging is on the immune system and offer potential ways to do interventions in the future. And so this is research that I did in collaboration with an actual neuroscientist who actually understands how these hormones are produced. And he's pursuing more of the, how do we restore the normal cyclicity? How do we get these hormone levels to come up in a safe way? Because there's also a reason why our bodies stop producing these hormones as we get older. So we can't, not everything needs to be restored to youthful levels, right? There's also reasons and compensatory mechanisms that are in place for some of these, and we can't just mess with the biology and not expect perhaps an unexpected outcome or an adverse outcome. So it has to be very careful.
So let me oversimplify something, and it's okay to jump in and say, no. So I think we've been talking about the body rather than the head.
Yes.
Neuro.
Yes.
Okay. So to what extent is the brain and the neurological connections and all that impacting what goes on here? I assume it's all connected.
It's all connected. So in terms of the immune system, it's actually, there's definitely a two-way stream, and I'm not really sure who's in the driver's seat. So we know, for instance, that as we get older, there's a lot more inflammation. And that's mostly because as immune cells get older, they tend to not be so careful with how they produce these inflammatory products. They get a little trigger happy and they make more of them. And now we know that this systemic, so out in the body, increased inflammation can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and could actually be precipitating or accelerating the development of neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's disease and dementia, cardiovascular strokes, and other problems. So speaking of inflammation and affecting other organ systems, so how the immune system touches other organ systems, osteoporosis. So osteoporosis is literally a loss of balance between the cells that do what we call bone resorption, so they eat up bone, and the cells that make bone. And we have both cell types and they balance each other out so that your bones stay strong. When we get older, we're tipping the balance towards more the cells that are eating up the bones, and fewer cells are making new bone. And that's how we end up with osteoporosis. Those cells that resorb and make new bone are actually primitive cells of the immune system. They are related to macrophages and monocytes in our blood. They all are derived from the same progenitor cell. And so they are actually a type of an immune cell. In the brain, we have these cells called microglia, and their job is to maintain a lot of these synaptic activities and make things work okay. Microglia are also macrophages. They're actually immune cells in the brain. They're brain resident immune cells. And so there is actually a lot of crosstalk between the immune system and other organ systems. And I think for a long time, I mean, definitely when I was in graduate school, there were all these silos, right? The neurologist and the neuroscientist studied the brain. The immunologist studied the immune system. The bone people studied the bone. The muscle people studied the muscle. Well, it turns out it's not that simple. All these organ systems are constantly talking and interwound. And so now I feel that science has really shifted over my lifetime. And now we're doing more global and multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research where for example, I study how alcohol abuse impacts the immune system. And my favorite person to work with and my long-term collaborator is a behavioral neuroscientist. And so we're looking at how the brain and addiction and things that control behavior are modulated by the immune system and vice versa. And that's really the way of the future. We need to make more of these types of multidisciplinary teams to address these complex questions in biology. We can't do them when we're all working in silos.
Wow, that's cool. So Parkinson's kind of a thing. Is that, I'm Are people more susceptible to getting Parkinson's if they have COVID?
I don't think that I have not read or seen any connection between the two things.
And Alzheimer's?
I mean, I think that's too early to know right now, to be right, because it's all happening acutely. But there's definitely this, it's been referred to with multiple names, but this long haul COVID syndrome where people have this sort of like brain fog and they can't remember things. They don't feel like they're quite as sharp as they were before they had COVID. And those are people who had really severe disease, right? The people, especially people who had to be intubated. So there's a couple of things going on here. One is most of the studies to date show that the virus doesn't cross the brain, but all that inflammation that your body is experiencing in response to this massive viral infection, all those inflammatory mediators can cross the blood-brain barrier and they can act on the brain. And the brain is very susceptible to this inflammation. Two, most people who end up with any stay in the ICU whatsoever have a high incidence of cognitive and neurological complications down the road. So the act of being intubated and having a machine breathe for you is a huge problem. And so if you had severe COVID, is it COVID? Is it the inflammation that came with COVID? Or is it the fact that this individual was in the ICU and had to be intubated? So we have to start separating. But I think that those two factors are at play at once in some cases. But we definitely know that some people who did not get intubated, who are just really, really sick, are experiencing this brain fog. And I would say in that case, it's the inflammation. It's really when your immune system goes all in and generates this massive immune response, there's always casualties to that. And which is why I'll come back. And if you get vaccinated, you won't have to generate this massive immune response because you would have trained your immune system to recognize the virus. You'll make a controlled, regulated immune response. And therefore, the number of organ systems that have to be casualties of the massive cytokine storm will be reduced to a minimum. So that's another reason. And there's actually studies that have shown that people who have had severe COVID and then got vaccinated afterwards experienced an amelioration of all their COVID-related long-haul symptoms. So the brain fog, all this, in some patients that all went away by getting the vaccine, because I think it retrained the immune system to stop pumping all these inflammatory markers willy-nilly and instead sort of focus that response on a target.
Fascinating. Thank you. So to sum up a little, if people need to be intubated, ventilation, the body, it's not a natural thing. And that's like an invasion. And so it causes like a hyper. What I'm hearing is that you said it causes a hyper response. And that in itself weakens the whole body.
Right. Yeah. So you have, we know that SARS-CoV-2, the virus, in some people just leads to this massive inflammatory response. And if you add on top of that, the fact that, if it gets so bad that people need to be put on mechanical ventilation, then that act by itself is also another hit to the body. So it's a double whammy.
Thank you so much for being on our show. Mark has just shown up. I'm going to let him in. Okay.
Well, did I miss a lot, Ed?
Yeah, you did. It was a total blast.
Oh boy, I feel so sad.
Well, but you'll see it on demand.
Oh, good. I will watch it. I look forward to that.
We want to send it around the world.
Wow.
So we were talking about potential referral or introductions to other doctors who would come on the program because Mark, we started something good and it's taken hold now. So let's double down.
We'll do it. We'll do it.
So I'll send some names and I'm happy to just let them know, like, oh yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Just hang out for 30 minutes and have a conversation. But I'm telling you, with scientists, prepare the questions for them. So just look them up online and come up with a bunch of questions for them.
Yeah.
Ask them to come up with their own questions. They're never going to do it.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We'll get that down to to science.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
pun intended.
So thank you, Doctor, for your spontaneity
Yeah,
and
thank
for
you. Yeah, thank you.
all
Please call me
of this
Ilhem.
education. Yeah.
And let me know if I can help with anything.
Okay. So, Mark,
Yeah.
thank you. I got to go.
Yeah.
That's
And
it?
so I'm going to sign off. And
Okay.
Thank you for joining us in the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show.
Have a wonderful day, and stay safe.